Welcome to season 2 of the Jeremy Mullins podcast, where we take a deep dive into different educational topics to help you optimize your life. I am Jeremy, your host, strength and conditioning coach and dietitian, and I'm back today with registered nurse, co-founder of Homegrown Lifting. Got it right that time. I always call it equipment, but hey, got it right today.
You did,
Mr.
man.
Zach Bowen, right?
Bowden, yeah.
Oh, done. Got to put the
Yes,
Z in
sir.
there. Awesome. Well, hey, man, we had a great conversation last time on recovery, and we kind of, I don't accidentally just in conversation started going down the rabbit hole of, what you see like inside of the ER when it comes to people falling and getting injured and that type of stuff. And I was like, man, what would be a great conversation is the importance of resistance training. And I think, from your experience, especially in different fields, I was thinking about this, so you've got resistance training, of course, like when you were playing collegiate ball, right? I'm sure
Yeah.
those co or those people you played with are still friends to the day. So I have a
Oh, yeah.
question, that I'm going to look at there. Like, are those individuals still lifting or what, where's their quality of life went? But also in the simple fact of being inside of a clinical setting, the ER, you get to see a whole host of different age groups, I would assume.
Yes. Yes.
Different
Anything
age
comes.
groups.
We literally have to treat anybody that walks through the door. Doesn't matter, age, sex, race. We have to. If you walk in the door, you have a complaint, you're getting seen by us. That's the nature of the emergency department.
Gotcha. So it doesn't matter, right? Like
No.
it's not a, I know there's a lot of private practices now,
Yep.
when in certain, but with the ER, it's everything, right?
Yes.
And
Yep.
they figure out the insurance and all that stuff like later on when it comes to that. So,
Uh-huh.
all
Very
right.
much so.
I do want to repeat, kind of regarding your professional background. So I know we kind of skimmed over it last time, but you worked in financial services. How many years were you in finance before you went back?
So
Did you go
yeah, I
back
worked
to
I worked in
nursing school?
finance, yeah, about
Okay.
5 years.
And then
Yeah.
did you go back to nursing school while you still worked finance, or was it like 5 years in there and you're like, man, this isn't for me. I'm just going to pivot.
Yeah. So COVID actually offered me an interesting opportunity. I was working from home at my job here in Charleston. They'd shut down our office, and so working from home had a lot more free time during the day. I kind of always knew that finance wasn't the end goal for me. It's a great career. It is what it is, but no, it didn't really scratch the itch for me. Always was interested in healthcare. Actually volunteered as a firefighter here to kind of, get my toe in the door, got my EMT. Didn't really want to work on a truck, kind of wanted something that I could kind of go to and from instead of being in a vehicle all day. And nursing kind of, fell into my lap and, went back to school, did a 16-month nursing program, loved it, and applied to the emergency department and was fortunate enough to get hired. And it's been an awesome, awesome pivot for me. I've loved every second of it.
Awesome. So that just clicked for me last time I was telling you and the listeners my nursing experience, right?
Yeah.
And so you kind of did one of those advanced programs too, right? Like 16
Mhm.
months in and
Yeah,
out.
or the
Awesome.
accelerated break. Yeah.
Gotcha. Now, the other thing I want to pull up, and you didn't mention it last time, which I love from the personal standpoint of not necessarily bragging on yourself, but we're kind of got into, talking about what your goals were, for your next powerlifting meet. And, you said you were going to go and try to break some state records. Then you kind of mentioned those state records are yourself.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that, but I also like the fact that, what I try to teach everyone is like, and we have a saying around my team I coach online, people first, winning matters, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's the way we got to look at life, right? Winning means different things. Okay.
100%.
So I want people to understand that, but I love the fact that, you were humble enough to not lead with that information, but also like you care enough about that sport and that hobby, that you're chasing those goals. So I thought that was pretty good. And we wish you luck, for your upcoming meet. When was the date again?
It's February 8th. It's here in South Carolina. And yeah, it's at
Ooh, that's coming up
Palmetto
soon.
Clubhouse. Yeah, it's gonna be at our gym here in Charleston, and they do a great job. And yeah, man, like you were saying, it's one of those things, I love, breaking records and it's cool. But like I'm never gonna lead, like don't lead with that. It's like, come on, man. At the end of the day, I'm not getting paid to do this sport. It's something I like to do, it's good for you,
Yeah.
It's something you do for fun. It shouldn't
That's it.
define your personality or anything like that.
Yeah, give it 10 more years. When you're in your 40s, you lead with the injury.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
back in
like.
high
Hey
school.
man, I
Yeah,
tore my bicep deadlift.
yeah.
So
I
it's a
appreciate that.
changing of time, right?
Yeah,
You
no
know,
doubt.
and we talked about that, and this goes into our topic today. Guys, I was kind of, in my late 20s, early 30s, which Zach is at. Like, I went through that phase where it was like, okay, I got to be the strongest, person in the gym. I got to, chase these numbers. And what I found was like, no matter how strong I got, there was still that void of like, there's someone out there that's stronger.
Yeah.
And I wish I would kind of, if I could go back and tell myself, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, to really focus. Hey, Jeremy, focus on your journey. Don't worry about anyone else's. There's always going to be someone out there, quote, bigger, faster, stronger. So
100%.
winning isn't necessarily, having the world's heaviest deadlift for me. Okay.
Yeah.
Winning now is one, getting back to 500 plus deadlift for me, and then maintaining that into my 60s. That's winning for me. Like, I'm okay if I don't ever pull 600 again. I'm okay, with not ever hitting a quote unquote PR in the weight, because my PRs will be based on decades. Right. So, okay, I want to pull 500 again, and what's crazy, we talked about this. I could probably do that with straps right now,
Yeah. You
which is
probably could.
crazy. Like, to think of not deadlifting for, 6 to 8 months and then kind of getting back into it. Cause we went heavy at the gym, a couple times, and, I'm able to do 400 for like 3, and I'm like, if I had straps, I could probably still pull over 5.
Right.
So it's neat that the body, can adapt and maintain strength. You always lose some strength if you stop training. I get that,
You will.
right? But it's neat what the body can remember, and that's the ultimate goal. Okay, and I don't know if this one will air, guys. I apologize if this one airs after or before, my topic about living, a longer, healthy life. But my goal is that people build as much strength now in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, maybe even their 60s. Because I've got some ladies like that didn't start lifting till they retired, that
Yeah.
I would argue I'm going to build strength in their 60s to their 70. Now, at a certain point, all of us, we will not be able to build any more strength. But
Right.
the key is to maintain it and let it be a gradual drop in strength
Yeah.
over time. That is the goal that I have for everybody. That's going to kind of be our overlying topic that we're going to talk about today, is to make sure that we get strong so that we can maintain that to live a longer, healthier life.
Couldn't agree more.
And the weights that you should be lifting should be homegrown lifting.
Yeah, man.
Yes,
Absolutely. You
I'm
nailed
getting it.
it.
I'm getting it. All joking aside, again, listen, I'll say it over and over again: high quality products for a low price, right? And I think, and to you, to Will, like, I love the fact that how, as I've gotten to learn more about your company, how you guys really built the stuff for you, and really now, like, you're building it for other people, in the sense that, like, you haven't jacked your prices up. You guys are keeping it the same, and you're just doing the volume. And I really appreciate it, because there's a lot of people that sometimes the barrier of entry, unfortunately, is the price tag that comes along with some of that equipment.
Yeah. Oh, and I totally get that, man. Price is a huge, huge component of our business strategy, and that's something I don't really ever foresee us budging on, quite frankly. We take a lot of pride in that.
Awesome. And here's something I want to do a giveaway. So any listener, if you have purchased any product from them, make sure to tag myself, tag Reno, tag the podcast. I'd like to give away, if you've bought some equipment already, just tag yourself lifting the equipment. We'll give away a $50 gift card so that you can get some more equipment. So it'd be cool to see who
Absolutely.
else got the equipment out there, what you're using it for, and all that stuff. Because I always tell people, like, hey, there's going to be one piece of equipment that you have, let it be a kettlebell.
Yeah.
Because with kettlebell, you can do just about anything. So if there's
So versatile.
if you can only get one piece of equipment, make it a kettlebell. Okay. Now, if you're, chalking your spouse into it, just let her know that one piece of equipment is really like the squat rack, the bench, and the barbell and the weights.
Yeah.
Just say it comes in one package. It's one piece of equipment.
There you go.
That's my tip of the day. But hey, today's topic, I want to think of, like, weight training, resistance training. It's almost like a savings account, if you think of it, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like your retirement account. I think the more that individuals lift and are consistent with the lifting over time, the bigger they're building their retirement account to live a longer, healthy life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And my question to you, and once again, first thing that comes to your mind when I say this, what's probably the number one injury related to falls? So when someone comes with a fall inside the ER, what's the number one injury that is associated with that?
Yeah, so you can break that into emergent and non-emergent. Non-emergent, obviously going to be a wrist sprain, an ankle sprain. That is what it is. That's part of life. That's inevitable. You're all going to have that. An emergent injury from a fall, a lot of our older patients, we see a ton of pelvic fractures, a ton of femur fractures, and a ton of wrist fractures from outstretching that hand, falling on that hand, fracture the wrist, right?
Yep.
Not terribly emergent. That's not going to normally result in a horrible outcome for the patient, but it's painful. It sucks. Femur and pelvic fractures, on the other hand, those can be quite emergent. You can bleed out from those very quickly, especially fracture. If you fracture your pelvis, there's a lot of blood stored in those bones down there. Your bones actually carry a lot of blood in them. Fracture your pelvis, you can bleed into your stomach, for lack of a better term, in the abdominal cavity, really rather. And that blood can kind of mask and like sit there for a while, and you can assume that a patient is doing okay, doing fine, and all of a sudden they crump really quickly, and it's very, very emergent. And so that's important when you fall, and if you note any pelvic instability, call EMS, go see a provider ASAP. That's an emergent situation. But pelvic and femur fractures we see a lot with our older adults, and it's one of those are two areas that can absolutely be, strengthened by weight and resistance training, younger and younger in life.
And I was looking at, and I can't remember where I read this at, but it was talking about, unfortunately, most people, if they're over 60, 60s, 70s, and they fall and they do fracture a femur, that the likelihood of death is actually pretty high after that. Like they have a really hard time recovering. And I don't know if you're able, have you seen that, read that, that stats anywhere? And I know for you, it's not with the ER, you're not following up with these
Right.
patients like you would if you were a family, practice. But, as far as in the ER, how long are they staying? Are they moving to a floor after that? Are they staying in the hospital quite a bit? What do you see with
Yeah.
that?
If you have a femur or pelvic fracture, you're going to be operated on in the hospital. We're typically not going to send you home without outside of some very extenuating circumstance. Because it can be very emergent. The patient can't move really if there's like they need to be operated on and they need to be fixed in the hospital. So they'll typically get operated on, they'll be sent to a floor and they'll start their rehab and recovery. For our older patients, staying in the hospital, you don't want to be staying in the hospital for a very long time. It's just not going to result in a great outcome. You want to get folks back home. It improves morale. They get to be with their families. They get to start outpatient rehab. So the quicker we're able to, move them through the process, typically the better outcome is what happens. So I'd say there isn't like a super reliable time frame because every patient is different. In the emergency department, we want to stabilize the patient, get them up the operating room as quickly as possible. In the hospital, it really depends on what the surgeon, what the upstairs doctors think in terms of timetable. But shorter is better. I can tell you that, and shorter is associated with better outcomes for patients. I would undoubtedly assume that as well.
Yeah, and there's a couple, I hate to call them myths because they are true to a certain degree, but we hear
Yeah.
all the time, like, hey, as you age, you lose muscle tissue, right? Like, okay, that is a certain point, but I don't think that that should be an absolute, right? Because what we've heard and always been told is like, okay, once you get into your 30s, after your peak in your teenage 20 years, you start to lose, muscle tissue, X percent.
Start to die in your 30s is
Yes.
what people like to say. It's like,
Yeah,
okay.
X percent per decade. Or the other one
Yeah.
that we hear is bone density. Like, oh, your pink bone density is in your 20s. And I would argue that's even for you, I bet your bone density now at 32 is more than it was at 22.
Oh, unquestionably so. Yeah.
Because like you were saying, you were training as a collegiate athlete, as a running back, you were training a certain way with weights, more from the standpoint of power and be able to just take a hit, right?
Right.
Like not for absolute strength and not loading the muscles and the bones up as much as you are powerlifting. So I like if we did a DEXA scan and did a T score, Zach at 22, Zach at 32, I guarantee 32, you have a higher bone density. And this was one of the first times that, like, I think in my young professional career, I was like, man, what I learned in college, what I learned in the book isn't necessarily 100% true.
Yeah.
And what happened, we touched a little bit on this podcast before. I worked for a bariatric surgeon, and I touched on, we had a DEXA scan in his office. Now, it was more for body fat and looking at muscle mass versus body fat loss versus muscle mass loss, but it also did the T scores. And I remember having some 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds that were first starting resistance training, and we watched their bone density go up over a 3 to 5 year span.
But
And,
certainly. Oh,
and
absolutely.
yeah, but going back to the young college, 25-year-old me, you're reading the book that no, bone density is its highest at 20 some years old, and you can't increase it, and that's false. By resistance training, you can increase your bone density over time. And where I'm going with this, and I know it's probably hard to tell, when you see a lot of the fractures, do you see a lot of falls or car wrecks where someone doesn't have a fracture where you thought that maybe under the circumstances they would had, and it was because they do resistance train, or they carried a little bit more muscle tissue?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm surprised every day at work. And you've definitely seen some things where you're like, dang, like you fell off that boat. That was pretty big fall. Your ankle's probably toast there, bro. And
Yeah.
he's totally fine. He sprained his ankle, no problem. No tib fib fracture, nothing. It's like, wow, okay. Good for you, man. Pretty like fit person. And so yeah, you do see it. And it always it's a pleasant surprise for sure.
How many pickleball injuries do you see?
So many. I mean, the sport is great. It's growing in popularity. It's great to get active, great to be out there. But the thing with pickleball is that in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, is like it's so accessible for people. They get out there and they put all these shearing forces on these joints, these knees, these ankles. They're stopping, they're starting, they're changing direction. You get a lot of soft tissue stuff, and then you'll trip and fall. Let's say you sprain your ankle. Oh, I want to continue finishing the match, whatever. You slip and fall with ankle instability, break the wrist, and
Yeah.
it's like, there you go. So a ton of pickleball injuries for sure.
Yeah. And I think, like you
Especially,
said, I actually played the game twice now and enjoyed it. Right,
yeah.
it was a fun sport to play. It has picked up in popularity, which I love, and has
Mhm.
picked up in popularity with the older clientele. Okay,
Yes.
so my point with this, I'm coming back in on the side of saying, like, I love the fact that they picked that as their hobby, but do not forget the importance of resistance training. So I have a buddy who's a radiologist, and he's mentioned, like, hey, Jeremy, you'd be surprised at how many deaths we're seeing from pickleball because people are falling and they hit their head.
Yes.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
and you don't think
Mhm.
about this stuff, but like for you live it, right? He lives it. You guys are in that. So, you see things that the average person, is not going to see and not going to think about. Right.
Yeah.
And my point of all this is not to scare people from not playing pickleball. Like, hey, go play it. It's great
For sure.
cardiovascular. Play pickleball, but make sure you're doing resistance training. That's going to be the big takeaway. Like, I want people lifting so that they build their retirement in the sense of muscle strength and muscle mass, because we're going to lose both of these as we age, but we can prevent losing it at a higher rate with those behaviors that we put into place, such as resistance training, such as protein intake, maybe hormonal HRT, hormonal replacement therapy for certain ages. Like, all those things can help us maintain this muscle tissue, maintain the strength as we age.
Yeah. And I
Now,
mean, if you start from a higher plateau as well, if the denser your muscle and the denser your bones are, you're starting at a higher plateau, right? Even if they do, if you get osteopenic as you age and they get thinner, if they're thicker to begin with, you're going to come out ahead of most folks. So
yeah.
start young.
Well, and this is interesting. I mentioned earlier, how many of your teammates have you saw that are still into fitness and wellness, and how many of them have maybe unfortunately went into like a sedentary lifestyle, and you can really tell the difference in that aging process just from that subgroup?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So most of my friends, they still get after it pretty good. I got a buddy here in Charleston who I played with the Duke, and he just did a half Ironman. Will, my business partner, is in fantastic shape. Don't ever let him don't let him see this episode because his head will get huge. Um, And then, I got another buddy from Duke, he's in med school right now. He's in wonderful shape also. But then I have a couple friends who, yeah, they've really struggled. And you see that a lot with linemen as well too, because they're forced to eat and they're forced to get so big and maintain and stay so big that it's tough for them after they graduate to stop, and it's tough. And I totally empathize with them. But yeah, it's a real thing.
I think the lineman, it either goes
It does.
one way or the other. So
It
the
really
linemen
does.
either unfortunately continue those habits that they learned of force feeding, of overeating, and they continue doing it with less activity, or they flip the script and they just get
Right.
really good shape.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, I'm tired of eating this way.
It's an
Just
extreme one way or
yeah,
the other,
just
for
to
sure.
carry mass, and they end up being like the shredded ones that are living the
Yeah.
lifestyle. So that's neat to see. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but I got some notes I just going to kind of read, and I have an article that you actually looked up when we are talking about this topic. But we lose strength about 2 to 3 times faster than we lose muscle mass. So I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty neat to see. And I will say that that's under probably a calorie balance or a calorie
Yeah.
surplus. Because I would argue you go into a calorie deficit, you go into that catabolic state, you're going to lose muscle tissue if you're not consuming enough protein and if you're not doing resistance training. So remember, my fat loss journey individuals, increasing protein inside a reduced caloric diet is very, very important. It's more important in a reduced caloric diet than it really is in weight gain. So in weight gain, yes, you need optimal protein, but you don't need as much as if you're in a caloric deficit. Okay. And then we also lose power 2 to 3 times faster than we lose strength. And I can attest to that, as we talked about, coming back from injury, I didn't lose that much overall strength. Like I could
Right.
still move total weight pretty good. But where I really noticed it was like kettlebell swings, box
Yeah.
jumps, a lot of my power movements. I was like, ooh, this just feels
Feels
slow.
weird.
Yeah, not crisp. So that's
Yeah.
where I really noticed a lot of difference in coming back from that. And that point to being like, what we're encouraging people is, hey, build that strength, build that power, as much as we can in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, so that when we get into our 60s, 70s, and 80s, we can maintain it and gradually lose it versus it kind of falling off a cliff, for lack of better terms.
Yes.
Yeah, and this in the study looked at, it was pretty neat. It was muscle mass index as a predictor of living longer in older adults. And the big takeaway, coming out of this, was to show that, though those individuals who were underweight or died in the first 2 years of follow up, were excluded, right? Because it was more of like they were underweight inside of this. So, but
Right.
I would argue that should have been in the stats, right? Because if someone's underweight, they don't have enough muscle tissue.
Yeah.
So
That should be the target.
right, but this was kind of looking at like just obesity in the sense of like,
Right.
okay, hey, if someone's overweight but they have good muscle tissue, they're likely to live longer versus someone
Yeah.
who is overweight and doesn't have the muscle tissue. Okay, so I
Correct.
wish they wouldn't have excluded those that were underweight, because what we're looking at is the same thing here. Like
Yeah.
muscle tissue is preventative. But yeah, what they found is like, up to 30% differences of death, all cause mortality in those that have more muscle tissue when we get into our 70s and our 80s.
It's a big deal, man. It really is.
So very important to do that. Couple other things that I got in here and get your thought on. Okay, is optimize and focus on protein and total injury needs. We kind of touched on that. Like, hey, if you're in a
Yeah.
caloric deficit, you're going to need a little bit more protein there, because it's catabolic. We generally recommend, and we mentioned this on the last show. And let me take a step back. Have you ever tracked your nutrition at all?
They did it for us in college.
Okay.
Since I've gotten out of college. I've gotten to a point where I'm pretty satisfied with my weight. I'm pretty satisfied with how I eat. If I want to optimize that, then I definitely need to be more diligent about tracking my nutrition. But no, I have never actually sat down and calced out like what I eat every day.
Okay.
And
So
that would be cool to figure out though.
yeah, and probably what I would have you do, like, and just use this as an example, guys. So, like, if Zach came to me and was like, "Hey, Jeremy, I really want to dial in my nutrition. Where
Yeah.
would you start my macros?" Like, I wouldn't give him starting numbers. I would just tell Zach, "Hey, go track and let's look and see where your baseline is now." Because
Right.
right now you got a pretty good baseline based on, what we've talked about. He keeps it simple. He eats his veggies, he eats his fruits, he eats his protein sources. Like, hey, go find out where you're at. Then you can start making changes based on baseline. And I think that's important for a lot of people, to look at. But generally, we like to do, 1 gram of protein per target body weight as a starting point. And once again, if you're doing 1 gram of protein per target body weight and you're trying to maintain your weight, or you're just trying to maintain strength and gain some muscle tissue, that's plenty of protein. Where I like to increase it is more in my fat loss clients because of the benefits that come along with thermic effective food. So you're going to burn more calories with higher protein. It's going to help with satiety. And the other one that I think is missed out a lot is resting metabolic rate. So there's plenty of data out there that shows if people go on these low calorie diets, that it affects their resting metabolism, not only short term, but really years to come. So what I like to do is increase protein inside of someone's diet, even 50, 100 grams over the 1 gram per target, because it gives them extra calories. They're eating extra 200, 400 calories a day, total calories, but they're not necessarily getting it from their fuel sources. So they're still dropping weight, and it protects the metabolism. So that's some things I like to do, from that standpoint. But some other notes here: heavy loading load bearing activity, AKA powerlifting fits in that, right? Lifting weights, strength training, heavy weights, stimulates growth of bone and more than impact of running, swimming, and cycling. Bone responds to mechanical tension, along with estrogen as key hormone to meditate a, signal of weight bearing, and that's where I think hey, estrogen is important inside of males just as is females.
It is.
And why we should look at our hormone levels as we age, and then maybe look at hormone replacement therapy depending on the situation of the person when it comes to this, right? Depending on when you're starting your journey, how old you are in your journey, those are some things that you consider or should consider. So a question I have for you: if you were to build a overall wellness program, okay, I don't give you the target audience, I don't give you the target client. I'm just saying, hey, Zach, I want you to build a fitness program that's going to keep people healthy. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, without going in the weeds here, I do not need percentages of max. I don't need stuff like that. But just in general, like squat press, that generic. What would you like to see on a weekly basis in someone's program?
Absolutely. First thing that I would highly recommend is everybody needs to start squatting in some way, shape, or form. It's such an important movement for us. Naturally, we as humans, we are squatting all the time. As we age, we lose that mobility a lot. And the barbell back squat is kind of what I have grown up with, that I love doing. It's just kind of second nature to me at this point. But if you don't like the feeling of a barbell on your back, there's so many different adjuncts you can use nowadays. You can use a kettlebell. You can use a safety squat bar, which protects your shoulders by holding it right here, which is an awesome barbell. You can front squat. Hell, you can use plain dumbbells as well. But everybody needs to be squatting. So important. Lower body bone density, pelvic bone density, just a remarkable movement. So you're squatting at least once a week. I'm actually a little more bearish on the barbell bench press, which is funny because I use it in competition. Like I compete, we bench press is one of the moves we do, but it doesn't put our shoulders in a super advantageous position. If we're speaking truthfully here, it's not the best movement. It's a cool movement. It looks really cool. It's like, oh, what's your bench? Blah, blah, blah. But I actually really love the overhead press. I think the overhead press is an excellent movement. I think it's a great test of raw strength. I think it's a really accessible movement for people. It's not as technical as the bench press is. And you get a lot of benefits from it. So
I feel like,
those two are huge movements for me personally.
yeah, sorry, I'm sliding in.
You're
Just
good,
from,
man.
I think naturally, as a coach, the overhead press is easy for the athlete to get correct, right?
Yes.
Because if you're holding the bar out in front of you, you just kind of recognize it.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Versus in that bench press, you've got to have that little, man, I don't even call it a half moon, the little moon, the little,
the backward C mode.
yeah, the
You
backwards
have to hit the
C,
groove. It's tricky.
and it's hard.
It
Yes. And
is. It's a very tricky move. The
it's
bench press is
very
hard.
tricky. And versus the strict press is pretty hey, get your chin out of the way, drive that bar straight up, finish overhead. Like, what do you mean by finish overhead? Oh, you'll know if it's out in front of you or behind you, you're going to fix it. So I like that point. Okay. All right. So we got squat and we got press.
Yeah, I love you. And then some sort of deadlift movement, be that a traditional deadlift, a sumo deadlift. I pull traditional. I've always loved the traditional deadlift. I think it's a great movement. If you are uncomfortable traditional deadlifting, or it's one of those things that feels inaccessible to you, a Romanian deadlift or an RDL is excellent. You can do it with a dumbbell. You can do it with a barbell. It's a great movement for your low back. It's a great movement for your hamstrings. That coupled with a good morning, you're kind of hitting all of your major food groups lifting wise with those four movements. I love that. I love training low back as well too. We have a lot of chronic low back people come in, low back pain. I feel like that's one of those things that can be avoided in the long term by strengthening that area. Don't be afraid to train your low back. It's an area that can be strengthened. And by strengthening that area, you will avoid a lot of those chronic issues, in my opinion. Granted, that's just me speaking, but personally, since I've started strengthening my low back and actually training that area, it's been great for me and it's made me a lot stronger as an individual overall.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add? Those are on my list too. So I've got, and I break them down a little bit different, like, hey, squat. Okay. Because
Yeah.
again, this is, we said generic recommendation. So I'm not even getting into like, is it a back squat? Is it a low bar, high
Yeah.
bar, kettlebell? I don't care. I just want you to squat. I want you to move in the squatting fashion. I want you to pull. So instead of down deadlifts, I just say pull, right?
Yeah.
It could be bent over rows, it could be pull ups, it could be modifications of that, as long as you're pulling and you're pressing, so we kind of
Right.
hit on that. Like, yeah, like, bench press I love, but I'm okay with doing heavy dumbbell presses and heavy barbell
For sure.
presses and then doing
For sure.
push-ups, right?
Yeah.
So long as you're pressing in both domains.
Yeah.
What else would you add in there?
I think, and you actually mentioned it. I think if there's one movement, let's say, you go to a desert island, you get to pick one exercise. That's all you're picking. I'm picking the pull up, and it's funny as a powerlifter to say that, but I grew up, my dad started making me do pull ups from a very, very young age. It's something that I've always done, no matter what program I'm doing. I love the pull up. I think it works the entire body. Legs notwithstanding, it's so easy to progressively overload the pull up. It's just you get your heart rate up, you get some great cardiovascular benefits from it. I think it's the best movement, bar none, in my opinion. So I'll end with that one, I guess. I'll heap all my praise on the simple pull up.
I like it. And then, I had a few things to that. And I'm really, as I've gotten older,
Yeah.
focusing on this, right? So I think we should try to hinge, once a week. And
Mm,
we could argue like the squat's a hinge. I mean, or even the deadlift to a certain point, I get it,
right.
but more of like a hinge movement being a, box jump or a kettlebell swing, right? But
Yeah.
if you think it from an athletic standpoint, like opening of the hips, that's very important. And then moving in all directions. I think that's something that as I'm getting older and I start looking more at, my clientele is getting older and we're focusing on
Yeah.
living this longer, healthy life, like being able to move in all directions. So I'm not saying we need to sprint, backwards, but like in your warm up, do some lateral lunges, do some lateral, jumps, jump back and forth. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's important. And then jumping too, because I think, if you think about it as a kid, we jump
Jumping
in,
all the time.
yeah, we jump all the
Yeah.
time. And going back to like you mentioned this earlier in the call, like a lot of things that we see is turned ankles or we
Right.
break something because we fall or we step down. I even think about that this morning, and I was walking down the steps. We had a little girl sick, and I'm carrying her and all of her army. And when I say her army, like you learn things, guys, as the third kid, like, you learn things. Okay.
Yeah.
So both our kids have like puppies, and these puppies, man, they are like, they've been washed so many times, they look ragged. Right. So with the baby, we were like, okay, we got her a puppy, buy two extras.
Yes.
And, that way you can rotate them, you keep them fresh looking. But for some reason right now, she's got all three of them in the bed, right? So not only three puppies, but there's like a bear, and I got her, her quilt, and we're walking down the steps, and I'm like, at all this, and I missed that last step. Like I
Yep.
thought I was on the last one to where it goes on the landing, and I was on the second. And like I just stepped, it was one of those like jarring, and it's like, ugh. And I'm thinking, if I didn't have coordination, I didn't work out, and I was just an average 44-year-old that was 80 pounds overweight, like, would that have been a turned ankle?
Yeah.
Right? Would that have been worse? Right? And, those are the things I think it's important to like add some jumping into your routine. It doesn't have to be, box jumps or big jumps. I'm not saying that, but even like just picking the line on the floor and jumping back and forth,
Yeah.
doing a little bit of jump rope. So I've kind of added those into like a overall wellness program, is, hey, make sure some type of movement is in there, right? We're not saying powerlifting. We're not saying CrossFit. We're not saying F45. We're just saying the types of movement:
Yeah.
push, pull, press, hinge, move in all directions, jump. You do those
I
things
love
on
it.
a weekly basis, you're going to keep yourself in a great physical health as you move forward.
Yeah, I think that's very wise, and that's something that I'm going to be adding jumping to my little repertoire here. That's very wise. I actually
Hey,
appreciate
listen, you're not going to be 32 forever, brother.
I know,
You're
man. I know.
gonna be pushing you're gonna get to that point where like, you're closer to 40 than you are 30. And that's when it kind of like,
It hits you pretty good,
yeah, it
man.
hits you. It's my advice for you today.
No doubt, man.
Hey, one last thing I think I want to talk on the bone density. I'm big on walking and I'm big on rucking. And I think rucking also can be one of those things that increases bone density, not only lower body, that's pretty obvious, but what would be your opinion, on like increasing with loads, kind of more the cervical and that way, right? Definitely not going to get bone density in our arms from rucking, right? Because you're not using that. But I think adding a load, specifically a ruck or a vest, not only adds the load where you're getting some bone density with the legs, but also could be a little bit of the vertebrae and things like that because of the load.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of that in the pelvis. I think the postural change of that and fighting against the load as it pushes our posture forward. I think that you're absolutely going to see some bone density changes with the load. I think the increased effort you have to put into respiration is going to work our rib cage a good bit. I think we're going to see some increased effort from the diaphragm there. So you have a stronger diaphragm, opening up the chest, opening up the lungs, which is super important, being knowing how to breathe and expanding that area. So yeah, I think it's fantastic. And I've actually started doing that a good bit here on my off days. I think it's a great kind of I don't necessarily think it's a recovery adjunct to me personally. I kind of put it more in the category of working out still.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things I'm definitely interested in learning more how to like kind of dial that in and make it more of a recovery adjunct. I think 'cause it's really easy to do. It's really fun. You can do it with people.
Yeah.
I love it, man. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, we're big in the community, so I recommend that everyone walks 45 to 60 minutes a day. So if
Yeah,
people are starting their wellness journey, 45 to 60 minutes to me. And what I teach people is I don't want this to be exercise.
right.
Right. And what I mean by that is like, I get it. I have a lot of people right now because of the weather, not for you and I, because we're south. We got some, hey,
Yeah.
it's gonna be 70 degrees here this weekend for those listeners out there that are in the 2 foot of snow.
Oh man.
So but they're like, I have a lot of people right now. It's like, Jeremy, can I ride my recumbent bike at home instead of walking because I just can't get outside in the weather? 100%. But the reason
Right.
we encourage walking is you can double dip the walking versus I don't want to say an hour of low intensity cardio because then you have to go to the gym or you got to have a piece of equipment to do it. Versus the walking, you can take a phone call, right? You can, call the family, you can walk the dog. There's things that you can do. Or if you're super busy, right? You can do 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there throughout the day. So that's the reason we encourage the walking. And then, yes, progressing up generally to a vest. And I like it for multiple different reasons. One, the one we just spoke on. Data will show that will increase bone density, especially in the legs. But I never thought about like you mentioned the pelvis. I was thinking more of like, vertebrae in the spine.
Yeah.
We also see that in overweight individuals. Like overweight individuals, when we're talking 100, 150 pounds overweight, bone density in their legs are generally pretty good.
Oh, it's very good. Yeah.
Yeah, because they got to adapt and they got to carry on the weight. So that's generally one, positive that comes out of that. But also from the caloric expenditure standpoint, you're adding that load in the ruck, you're just going to burn more calories, from the standpoint that you got more load on there. So I think it is a great tool to use. And as you mentioned, like it's a great social aspect too,
It
where you can
is.
get anybody together and go for a ruck.
Yeah.
Awesome. Takeaway from the day, guys, get as strong as you can. Okay. Building strength is going to prevent a lot of the things that Zach sees inside of the emergency department, when it
Yes.
comes to injuries and falls that are ending up in, breaking a femur, breaking a pelvis that I would argue that ends up changing the quality of life, if not
Certainly.
being life threatening, for a lot of people who are in their 60s, 70s, and that can be preventable. And that's the
Yeah.
whole goal here, right? And no matter where you're at in your journey, if maybe you're on your journey right now, that it's an aesthetic thing. You're listening to the podcast because your friend gave it to you and you tried to lose 30 pounds for a cruise. Cool. I got it. That's cool that you started your journey for that. But I eventually want you to focus on the journey to your 62 to 82-year-old self. And that's what we're training for. That's what we're looking to do to increase this bone density, increase this strength, increase this muscle tissue so that when we get into our 60s, we slow that decline and we can live the best quality life in those last 20 or 30 years as possible.
Most definitely.
Zach, appreciate your time again, man. I definitely want to have you back on, talk about some different topics here. Probably be after the competition. So I might have to bring you on. We talk about the competition, see how things went, and maybe really talk about the deload weeks
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
peaking. Yeah, peaking for lifting.
Yeah.
Because that's not a topic I've covered on the podcast from a performance standpoint. So we could go in, maybe talk about the importance of taking a deload, since that will be very important for you in the next coming weeks with the competition coming up.
Yes, I'm very, very excited for that. It's my favorite time.
Awesome. Well, if we don't talk to you before then, good luck in the competition. And listeners, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.